We'll start the recording. Excellent. Thanks for joining us for our fourth and final installment on setting up your plan. Today, we're going to talk about time's up. It's time to have your action plan and your communication plan ready to submit and check that off your box for this year. Charlie dropped the link to the slide deck in the chat box, as well as our attendance. So if you want to, we're going to start with our inclusive opening, and if you'll pause the recording, Charlie, and then we will get started. Just a reminder of our agreements. Please take an inquiry stance today, especially, ask questions, challenge us a little bit, because there's so much in this process that it really helps if you unpack it and say it in your own words. So don't always rely on our words. Obviously, grounding statements in evidence, assuming positive attentions, etc. We're starting almost on time, and we appreciate your presence today. So go ahead, Charlie.
I'm updating the share settings real quick. I want to make sure everybody has access to that.
Oh, okay.
So
sorry about that.
Be good to go. If you go ahead and hit refresh, you should be good.
Thanks, Charlie. So we're going to review the components of the action plan. Consider a year-long approach for communication, right? It's not just about that initial, what are we telling the board we're doing and getting their approval? It's really about thinking about this from a year-long approach, because it's not just about here's what we're going to do, but also here's how it's going. And then review potential goal language. We are going to just spend a little bit of time. We keep pushing you off a little bit and trying to get you to think about the goal after you have all the other decisions kind of made. You have a direction, but now it's time to fine tune that goal language. And just a reminder of our through line. Last time we were together, we had brought Liz in to talk to you about the evidence-based strategies. So if you want to click Charlie, okay. And then, my order must be off. Evidence-based strategies, because those evidence-based strategies, if we use them strategically, will actually help us build our action steps. We've been working with some teams, and it's really easy to see in the evidence-based strategy, what is it we need to do? And what we need to do and how much we need to do is really going to impact what your goal statement is going to be. And it's also going to impact the quarterly progress you expect to make. So, we're gonna wrestle with those a little bit today. So, Charlie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Tanya. Good morning, everybody. So everything that we've done up to this point in our installment series is really kind of give you a little bit of information, but then give you some practical application. So what we did is we really wanted to laser focus in on an example for you. And the priority statement that we've been working through over the last few installments is up on the screen. If we build teachers' capacity to increase student access to text and vocabulary, teachers will provide students greater opportunity to demonstrate what they know and can do. So this is a lot about ensuring that what we put into place in our action steps and what we've adopted as our evidence-based strategy for this quote unquote fictitious school that has this priority statement embedded into its plan. If we focus on building teachers' capacity, then we'll hopefully get to an opportunity where our students are able to demonstrate knowledge and mastery of the standards in their particular grade level and content area. So it's vague enough where we look at text and vocabulary, maybe through the lens of ELA. We can look at text and vocabulary through the lens of social studies, through the lens of any of our other core areas, or even some of our non-core content areas as well. So the focus of the plan might be specifically on ELA. However, we know that ELA is not specifically taught in isolation. So as we've developed this installment over the last 3 sessions, and now in our fourth and final session, the information that we shared in terms of the plan development is also coupled with kind of this example / fictitious school that Tanya and I have kind of put into practice. So we're taking that theoretical and moving it into more of a practical approach through this example school to walk you through how we would facilitate this process within a school. So our priority statement kind of lands here. And what we'd like to do today is share a little bit about the action steps and how to develop those action steps. What's it going to look like through the lens of the portal when you're thinking about taking the action steps that are a direct result of the evidence-based strategy that you would have selected based on our last installment. What is that going to look like in the actual portal? How do we input some of those pieces? What are the requirements to input into the action steps for the portal requirements in FRCPP? And then do we have any professional development steps or communication steps that kind of go along with these action steps that we're developing our plan around? And then Tanya is going to kind of land the plane today talking a little bit about how do we take the action steps, the PD steps, and turn them into an actionable goal statement instead of throwing darts at a wall, trying to come up with your goal statement and then retrofitting your action steps into that particular goal statement. It's actually a lot easier to use that evidence-based strategy, as Liz shared during our last installment, to be the vehicle through which we're going to develop our action steps throughout the course of this process. So just want to bring everybody back to that evidence-based strategy just to kind of reactivate some of our prior knowledge from our third installment. As a reminder, we have 4 different tiers of evidence under ESSA. ESSA tier 1, which is going to be our strongest tier of evidence, all the way down to tier 4, which is demonstrating a rationale. And as a reminder, we can have one or multiple evidence-based strategies per goal area. So if we have an academic goal, we might have 1, 2, 3, maybe evidence-based strategies that our committees might recommend we specifically develop our action steps around. Or we might have one evidence-based strategy that's going to address multiple goals that we have throughout our plan. So there's a couple of different ways that we can kind of move and shake this. However, it really is based off of what are the goal areas that we want to focus on. Is it going to be an academic goal? Is it going to be a behavior goal, an attendance goal, a graduation goal, depending on the recommendations of your steering committee? And then as we start to peel back what needs to be part of that particular priority area, are we going to have multiple evidence-based strategies that we need to kind of come together under that priority area to develop our action plan and then our subsequent goal? Or are we going to have one evidence-based strategy that's going to help us address multiple goals in our plan? So our example here, based on our priority statement with teacher clarity, teacher support around increasing students' access to vocabulary and text to ensure that they are mastering at a proficient level what our standards are asking us to, or students to know, understand, and be able to do. One of our steering committee supports might have been this particular example for us here. We might see an opportunity for this achievement goal to be around assessing students' learning frequently. So this is a tier 1 evidence-based strategy that Tanya and I are offering as an example that the fictitious steering committee might be recommending and say, you know what, the indicators of success within this evidence-based strategy really align to hopefully getting to this priority statement that we have in our fictitious schools. So the evidence-based strategy that our fictitious steering committee is looking at right now is assessing student learning frequently, which again is a tier 1 evidence-based strategy. And you can see here on the screen that we have multiple indicators of success that Tanya was mentioning before really could help drive what is it that our action steps should be written around. So we're going to let that evidence-based strategy and those indicators of success help us develop what is it that we need to be actionable on over the course of that year-long school improvement plan. So we have a few pieces here The school might assess students at least 3 times a year to determine progress towards standards-based objectives. So there might be some action steps that we need to take to assess our students in those particular grade levels and subject areas at least 3 times a year, 3 times per year, and progress monitor throughout those 3 administrations. We might even be looking at the school providing teachers timely reports of results from standardized and objective-based assessments. The school maintains a central database, which might include the students' test scores, et cetera. And then all teachers assess student progress frequently using a variety of evaluation methods. There's some other specific evidence-based strategies that we might consider here. We might look at coaching. We could potentially look at some additional effective instructional strategies, or even do something aligned specifically to peer coaching or walkthrough. So everything that you're seeing here could potentially be those contributing indicators of success to this tier 1 evidence-based strategy. So again, just bringing everybody back to some of the resources that Liz shared the last time we polled that particular evidence-based strategy from our evidence-based strategy websites here. You all might be familiar with our PA Evidence Resource Center. That is something that Liz highlighted as the priority the last time that she was with us. That was built by Pennsylvania for Pennsylvania, but we also have a slew of other specific evidence-based strategy websites that we can go to consider the vehicle through which our action planning could particularly take place. So with that, what we noticed in this fictitious school is that in order for us to be successful in ensuring that students are reaching mastery and have access to text and vocabulary at their particular levels, we're missing a piece here. The steering committee is saying we're missing that common assessment piece. So we need to make sure as part of our action steps that we include some information around the development and deployment of our common assessment. So this is where we'll kind of walk you through what is it that you need in your plan that's going to be kind of the theoretical piece, and then what does this look like practical and action. So the action step grid that you're seeing on the screen include all of the components that would be required of us to include in the plan in the portal. So we'll need to make sure that, number one, we're writing out what our actual action step kind of title is. When are we anticipating to start and complete that particular action step? Who is going to be the lead person that's going to kind of oversee and be the champion of implementation for this action step? And Tanya and I would recommend, as kind of a sidebar here, that you don't name somebody exactly in the steps. So it says lead person / position. We would actually encourage you all to consider the position, because if there is some transiency or changes in staffing throughout the course of the implementation of the plan, we don't want our action steps to say that Charlie Travato is going to be the lead person here. We might say that it's going to be the building principal. So instead of naming the person, we want to name the position here to make it as general as we can, in case there are some staffing changes throughout the implementation of the plan. You might also include here some materials, resources, and additional supports needed. So these materials and resources and supports could be internal, but they could also be external as well. We oftentimes see that the schools that we support end up writing in some IU supports here. So for example, if you're rolling out PBIS or looking to continue support in PBIS or MTSS, a support that could be part of your action steps is connection with a facilitator at the IU. So having just that line of communication and that line of support through the intermediate unit. But that particular area, again, can include internal resources, or it can include external resources and supports. And then what Tanya and I will unpack a little bit more this morning is, do we require professional development for our staff? Whether it's our professional certificated staff, our support staff, our administrative staff, or a combination of any of those different groups in our system. around professional development to ensure the timely and effective implementation of this action step. And then similarly, is there communication that needs to happen as we're trying to work through this particular action step? We are going to talk a little bit more about the anticipated start and completion date as we kind of go through our example. But what we do want to recommend here is you're kind of working through using your evidence-based strategy to be a vehicle for your development of your action steps. You don't want to just have one action step for one evidence-based strategy. You might be looking at copying and pasting this table or opening up multiple tables in the comp planning portal for your plan to get as granular as you can. You don't want to get so granular that it's going to be hard to manage, but you want to give enough detail and coherency around what your action plan is going to be and the multiple steps that you're going to take to ensure the successful implementation of your plan. So as an example for us, I mentioned, in our fictitious school that we need common assessment training. We need the development of common assessment and we need common assessment training. So as an example here, I just kind of filled in for us with our fictitious school what this might look like in terms of our action step here for this particular evidence-based strategy. So we might need some IU common assessment training that's going to happen and common assessment development that will happen for our 4 core content areas. So we're laser focusing in on math, ELA, science, and social studies here. We want that to start in August and complete in May. The person that's going to be in charge of this is the lead principal. You can see some of the materials and resources that are here for this particular school. We have a common assessment protocol, so we would link that in. We could certainly tap into our maps, our curriculum maps, and then we might need some additional IU support here for this particular action step. This action step is coming with a professional development step, and I'll show you what that looks like in the next few slides. And how are we going to communicate the importance of some of the pre-work and even some of the post-work for our communication here for this action step. One thing you might notice in the action step is we label it as quarterly, and you can see the start and completed date pretty much span the entire course of the school year. One recommendation that Tanya and I would give as you are working through the development of your action steps is that you're not creating every action step to span the entire course of the school year. Because as you're working through, whether it's biweekly implementation checks, your monthly progress monitoring, or even your quarterly routines to share out to PDE through the comp plan portal, especially if we are a CSI or an ATSI school. What we might want to do is get a little bit more granular with breaking out this particular action step. So my question here is, can we split this particular action step up and get a little bit more granular so we are able to report out progress on certain action steps on more of a quarterly basis? So for example, we might take this table and copy and paste it 3 times and have 4 tables now of the same action step, but our start and completed date might span the course of each particular quarter. So we're able to look at quarter 1 and report out progress on quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4. The next phase of this, since we identified a professional development step, is to make sure that we're kind of scripting out what is it that this professional development activity is going to be, who's going to be involved, what's the evidence of learning. And then you'll see at the bottom of the screen, what's the learning format? So the type of activity, the frequency of the activity, and then one of my favorite pieces is the integration of the Danielson framework that is being met in this particular plan. So you will, if you develop an action step and there is a professional development step that comes with it, when you click yes in the portal, it's going to open up a professional development activity for you to fill in, and you'll have to identify one or multiple Danielson domain components that will be met by the oversight of this particular professional development activity. So our example here for our fictitious school, for our common assessment training, our action step is to continue work with the IU or district instructional coaches for common assessment PD. You can see the audience that's here in terms of the subjects and the grade levels that we want to hit in terms of our core areas. The topics that are going to be included are the success criteria, learning targets, reteaching and enriching. Our evidence of learning. So how are we going to make sure that our training and our action steps that we're meeting the anticipated outcomes here for our professional development, and that our staff are successful in the creation and implementation of their common assessment. So we might have some common assessment data that's going to be discussed during our professional learning committees throughout, or communities throughout the course of the year. You can see the materials and resources, very similar to the action step, who's going to be in charge, and then what the anticipated timeline is. So again, that timeline here, if we were going to break this up into more quarterly action steps, we would see that start and end time be very specific to what your kind of start and end times would be for your quarters or for your trimesters, et cetera. And then your evidence of learning, you will be able to include multiple learning formats here, types of activities, and then of course your Danielson framework components that might be included here for this particular professional development step, or the steps that you will have. So as an example, some of the pre-work that we have in terms of what the training is, we're going to be developing those common assessments. It's going to happen on a quarterly basis during assigned time. And then the two Danielson components through the development of those common assessments is really going to be about potentially knowing and valuing our students, 1B, and then 1E, planning coherent instruction. And then where might we see evidence of learning happening within the classroom? So for you all as the leads in your building, and if you are the person that's going to be overseeing this, we might be looking at kind of a post implementation. So as you're doing your walkthroughs or providing feedback through informal or formal observations, we want to see the use of common assessments by department. So this might be happening through the culmination of our curricular units. And we might be providing some feedback, and we might be gathering some evidence of learning happening through 3D, where we're using assessment and instruction to help us guide next steps for our students. The other piece that we started to kind of toy with a little bit, and I actually just deployed this with an ATSI school last week, is we actually had the steering committee. This is a different rendition. After we were done with the action steps and the professional development steps, and we were reviewing it as a committee, we had this crazy idea to actually pull up the school's professional development calendar. So we pulled up their board approved calendar for next school year. And we used some sticky notes to help determine from August to April or August to May, when might we see the deployment, or what might the recommendation of the steering committee be to roll out some of these professional developments. So in a nutshell, we were tapping into the steering committee to help us develop when we should be strategically placing these professional development steps throughout the course of the school year based on the board approved calendar. So they were making a recommendation to the building principal and to me as the school improvement facilitator. So we had them look at the name of the professional development, what the number of subs might be that we would need, the number of staff or the type of staff that needs to be included in the professional development, and then what might be the potential dates that the steering committee would make some recommendations on to when the professional development should be rolled out.
Thank you, Charlie. So I'm going to pick up with the goal development, and I'm going to ask Charlie just to refresh real quick because I made a tweak. And while he's doing that, thinking about the goal development is probably the most frustrating piece, because obviously when you're starting this process, you want to have an end in mind. But as you develop the action plan steps, you're kind of asking yourself, what is the data I'm going to collect or refer to, or what are the, and this is slightly different, what are the interim targets that I want to achieve in order to get to whatever the overall goal development is. So as you're looking at this slide. Were you able to refresh? Did I miss that? You are
Yep,
so
you're good.
good. You know, this is where your priority statement is going to be revisited. If we do this, then that will happen. In the plan, they're going to ask you to identify your outcome category. That outcome category can simply be the essential practice. It could be the area in which you want to focus. So if it's literacy or math, but you need to identify that. The measurable goal statement is based on the data sources that you're monitoring, as we mentioned, and the nickname is whatever you want to call it in your LEA. This could be your common assessment goal, right? And then the interim targets. And you'll notice in this example, I only put 3 interim targets. Why do you think I only put 3? Because we're not going, our 4th interim target is actually our goal statement. So you can literally take your goal statement when you're done and drop it into your 4th quarter interim target, because that's what you're trying to achieve. Now, in doing this for so many years, I've always tried to make sure our targets were parallel. In other words, what's that mean? It means we're measuring the same thing all along in our process. But the problem is our interim targets do not take into account where we are in the school year. And what I mean by that is your first interim target, are you ready for this? September 30th. So I want you to stop and think about your school year. Where are you by the end of September? You're just getting started. So you have to be careful putting data targets in that quarter one if you are not even going to have assessed students yet. Think about how much learning has happened in that first target and if you're ready for assessments. And what kind of assessment are you doing? You're not really measuring any kind of growth at that point. You're just getting a baseline. You're going to see as we move through the next slide or the next 2 slides, what those interim targets are. So the anatomy of a goal, right? We've all heard of SMART goals, and the overall arching goal needs to be measurable, but we want to make sure it's also aligned to the strategy. So are we creating, does our strategy propose a change that is going to be measured by the goal? And are the strategies that the outcomes that the strategy is producing capable of being measured by an assessment? And that assessment may not come into play until later in the school year. So that's why we're going to focus our goal on assessment and student performance. But what you may see as we look at the interim targets, it's not always directly aligned to the assessment. So I'm going to stop talking for a second. Charlie, I want you to show the next goal. This is a suggested measurable goal for our common assessment strategy. And I want you to just look at it, and I want to hear your comments. What do you notice? What do you wonder? What do you notice? What do you wonder?
Just noticing how you go 95, 90, 80, 70. So what's the thought process with that piece, I guess?
I love that. Thank you. Yes. So that's what we call a step down goal. In other words, we're thinking at the end, we want to have 70% of our scholars proficient. Does that mean they have to be proficient by the end of the first benchmark or even the second? Aren't we still finding our stride? Aren't we, what a step down goal says is, what is your overall goal going to be? And if you start high, don't be afraid of missing your target. right? What do we tell teachers all the time? We tell them to set the bar high and students will reach it. If we set that bar lower, say we set it at 60% for quarter two, now you'll notice in benchmark 1, what is the 95% representing? How is that different from any of the others? And then I'll go back to the step down goal.
It's not necessarily based on performance, it's based on did they take the test? Did they?
Right, it's based on participation. Why did I pick 95%?
Because you want the most engagement, participation as possible in order to
Right.
measure the goal at the end.
I could have put 100%, right? I could have put 90%. Getting 100% of anything in this world, it's really hard. So in setting us up for success, that first benchmark is more about participation and less about performance, right? We want the students to be at least enrolled, and I chose, well, what else do you notice about this goal? Who is this goal for?
Ninth graders.
Ninth graders. Now, Charlie showed you in the action steps, multiple content areas. You need to identify the group of students that you're going to collect data on. I could have said the 9th and 10th grade scholars. I could have said 8th grade ELA students. I want to be really specific whose data I'm looking at as my indicator of success for my action steps. Because the common assessments in the example are being written in, that goal could have been applied to an elementary school, a middle school, or a high school. I just wrote the goal as if it were being applied to a high school. And I want to make sure I've got 9th grade scholars who are going to take that initial assessment that's going to measure growth over time, which is the classroom diagnostic tool, and give me an indication of prediction where they're going to be in terms of readiness by the time they take the state assessment. And I want to make sure they're enrolled in classes that are using common assessments, so that when I go and look at how students are performing on common assessments, I am making sure I'm looking at the right group. Anything else you notice?
Well, you have that they're going to score proficient, but also you have that it's predicting that they're going to be on track to proficiency. So
I'm using 2 different measures, right? The common assessment, because I'm asking myself, has the staff done anything in common assessment? You really have to consider the capacity of the staff and what you need to do. If you're just rolling out common assessment, what's the likelihood that they're actually going to be using a common assessment within that first benchmark? Maybe what you want to plan for when you're doing your action steps, especially if they've never done a common assessment before, is for all of the teachers in that content area to decide our first common assessment is going to be on a unit between October 1st and December 31st. We're actually going to do one common assessment. And so you would, and what your goal is you want 90% to score proficient on that common assessment. What does that, if you put that goal in front of teachers, that you want 90% of the students to score proficient on the common assessment they chose, what are the other implications of that? What are some other things that are a byproduct that you don't necessarily have to write into the goal? What are you hoping teachers will do if they know that that's the target? How can teachers set themselves up for success to have 90% of their students score proficient on a common assessment? What are all the things that they can do?
I would say you're going to progress monitor along the way or have a sense of, are they getting close to that?
Right. So hopefully they're going to strategically use some formative assessments to let them know if the students are mastering whatever the skills are that they're measuring in the common assessment. Yep. What else are they going to do? Hopefully.
I don't know if this is what you're looking for, but like, I would hope that my teachers would then be cognizant and specifically prepare students for the assessment.
Right. Maybe not prepare them for the assessment, but prepare them for the success criteria that the assessment
Correct.
is built around, right?
Yes.
Absolutely. So we're talking about teacher clarity.
Mm.
If they're going to write that assessment, if they're going to create a common assessment, all the teachers in that content area are going to agree on what does success look like? What's the success criteria for that unit? Okay. Absolutely. What else? So that means if they all know what the success criteria are for all students in that grade level on that common assessment, what else might they do? And I feel like it's, especially at the high school level, I don't always see this. And I hope that, I know some of you are in a small school, but even thinking about in an elementary, when you have all the teachers in a grade level targeting the same common assessment at the same time in the same content area, what else might they start to do?
You're talking about like co-planning?
Yeah, co-planning and collaboration. Absolutely. So this is a way of kind of getting some of what you want to accomplish in the process, but represented in an outcome in your interim target, right? So the other thing maybe you'll notice is that the benchmark targets, they're not parallel, right? One is a participation goal. One is, performance achievement. It's actually achievement for classroom diagnostic tool, the first one, but that's really a benchmark. I'm sorry, by December 31st, it might actually be a second administration. It might not be. It depends. When are you administering the classroom diagnostic tools? The idea being that if we're starting to put these pieces into place throughout the year and we start high, where we want to end at the end of the fourth quarter is a place of it's the law of averages, right? If we start high and we miss the target, but we're shooting for higher targets, overall, hopefully we'll get to where we really want to be by the end of the school year. Now, I arbitrarily chose 70%, but what would I base that 70% on? How would I come to that number? What are some things I could do? Do you think I went like this and went, 70%? Some of you might look at that 70% and say, that's too low. Like, I want a higher percentage. And some of you may look at that 70% and say, that's way too high. We're currently functioning at 37%, and I really want that to be raised. You need to use your data to decide what that target's going to be. Do you have any other there's no such thing as a perfect goal. This is just one to put out there and to talk about. Do you have any other questions about this? Okay, Charlie, if you want to go to the next slide. There's no such thing as a perfect goal, but the goal is a perfect time for you to think about your theory of action. If we do this, then that will happen. Does it make sense? If we write common assessments, will we see student achievement? If you click on that infographic, that's something the state has provided that explains the difference between step down and step up goals. Often we write a goal in an increasing amount. We start, we know it's the beginning of the year, we're just getting rolling. So we set low percentages for our targets. And we hope to get to that higher target. Well, that's okay if I only want, like, what happens if I have 50% of my students on track to proficiency at the beginning of the year? What is the likelihood that at the end of the year, I'm going to have 90%? What needs to happen to the 50% at the beginning of the year that weren't on track to proficiency? What does your system have to do?
It has to look at that and provide intervention or provide something that's going to help them be on track.
So a step-up goal isn't a bad thing to write, but think about the capacity in your school. Do you have all those pieces in place? I'm working with a school right now where we didn't meet our first and second benchmark interim target, but we did meet our third, and we are going to knock our fourth one out of the park. And the fourth one is the goal. So we started with where did we want to be by the end of the year? And we set our sights high. And yeah, maybe at the first and second interim target, we were like, okay, no, we didn't meet it. No, we didn't meet it. But it forced us to think about what do we need to do in order to improve that? And then the staff actually kind of forgot about the fact that we wrote a step down goal. And now that they're looking at their end of year interim target / goal, they're so excited because we actually achieved all of our goals. So it's just a different way of looking at this. And I just want to make sure that you have that as an example. All right, Charlie, I think I'm ready to turn it over. Oh, well, this is just thinking about your plan. Are your steps realistic? Have you anticipated any barriers? Timing is really key, right? Like you'll notice in that other measurable goal I showed you, those deadlines don't change. It's September 30th, December 31st, March 31st, and June 30th. Those are your quarterly targets. Even though your school may start earlier or later or end earlier or later, as far as the state is concerned, those are your quarterly target dates. So think about where are you in relation to the interim target dates when you're writing your, what you would hope to achieve. Do any of the changes that you make need, well, go ahead, Charlie. I'm gonna let them review on their own the questions just to think about their plan, but I'm going to turn it over to you for the communication.
Sounds good. Thanks, Tanya. So I'm going to land this for us so we can get into some of our unstructured time. We have some questions for folks, and you are certainly welcome to use them, or you can have your own conversation in your room. But we always want to make sure that we're prepared with some unstructured questions for you. So the last piece of this, which I think is one of the most, I think all of the pieces of the plan are important, but I think the communication piece is probably one of the most important pieces, because we want to make sure, number one, we're being transparent with what we have built into the plan. And that number two, we're also opening up lines for two-way communication to ensure that we're effectively monitoring and evaluating and adjusting course over the course of the implementation of the plan. So the plan communications is probably one of the easiest sections of the plan to create. So if you do end up having a communication step for any of your action steps, a communication plan will open up that includes what is the communication step, the topic of the message, the mode, so what means will you be using to communicate to the stakeholders, who's the audience that we are hoping to reach with this particular communication step, and what is the overall anticipated timeline. So as an example for us, with our quarterly common assessment development, I just came up with an example for our fictitious school to include what are the topics of the message for this particular step, including expectations of staff participating in the common assessment writing, including our measurable outcomes, the dates that the quarterly work will take place, and maybe potentially the dates that the quarterly work need to be finalized or submitted. The mode by which this is going to happen is through email and staff newsletter. This is going to go out to all of our professional staff. And we're hoping to do this 2 weeks prior to the start of the quarter. So we know that when the dates of the quarterly work will take place, and 2 weeks prior to the end of the quarter. So folks know when the quarterly work will be asked to be submitted. So in terms of some of the questions that we have, so your steering committee might take a look at some of the different communication steps to determine, are the communication steps realistic? Are there any potential barriers? Do we need to include anything, revise anything, or remove? And then another piece, just a layer here, is if you are a community member or were a community member looking at this plan, what would be the 3 words that you would use to describe the plan in a nutshell? So as you're thinking about the communication strategies and the communication steps that you're using for the internal components of your plan, and then how you're actually presenting the plan to the public, just keeping in mind, how are we communicating, and are there any potential barriers that we might be seeing or could visualize as we're thinking about those steps coming to fruition. So the last piece here is, what does that 28-day public review look like? So as we're considering the kind of wrap up of the draft version of the plan before this is board approved, we have it sitting for 28 days for our public review. So you may or may not have specific protocols or procedures for what that could look like within your system, but as you're kind of working through the last section of this plan, just considering, how do we want to communicate that this plan is out there, that we've spent a great deal of time kind of taking a restorative or with approach with our steering committee to develop our plan. So thinking through, how are we leveraging our website, social media, or maybe any other communication streams to connect with the public on the importance of what we're writing in the school improvement plan. Tanya and I wanted to give you just kind of an example of what this could look like, because your plan might be quite a number of pages long by the time everything's all said and done. We've worked with schools where they've just posted the plan, the draft version of the plan, soup to nuts on the website. We also here at the Lincoln Intermediate Unit for our comprehensive plan back in the 2021 school year, we posted a 1-pager that included the update to our mission and vision, the update to our educational value statements, and then our goal breakdown and action step breakdown by our goals. So this was just a nice visual that was posted alongside our ever-growing plan that we had when it was sitting for 28 days. So to give everybody kind of that high-level overview in a quick 1-pager around what is it that we've updated in terms of our mission, vision, values, what are our goal statements, and then what are the action steps at a very high level to kind of summarize some stuff for our for public consumption. So just something to consider as an example for what this might look like as you're considering that 28-day public review. So with that, we would love to offer up our evaluation, and I believe it looks like Tanya put the evaluation link into the chat. So this is going to end kind of the structured component of our session today, and we certainly appreciate your feedback since this is the 4th and final installment. If you've been waiting to do evaluations, that's totally fine. We certainly would appreciate kind of an evaluation of the entire series. But of course, if you've been filling out the evaluation each time, we certainly would love your feedback specifically as well on this particular installment around action steps, goal development, and communication. We also want to remind everybody that we have our Schoology group that is available for continuous improvement and for our school level essentials community of practice that you are all part of. So our Schoology code is on the screen. If you are a new or returning user, we do have some easy directions to get you logged in and have all the resources that Tanya and I have been sharing over the last 4 months as part of the Schoology course. So with that, we do have some unstructured networking time until about 9:30 with just some guiding questions if you need them. So in terms of communication, so how does effective communication planning contribute to school improvement? How does clear and transparent communication between our stakeholders enhance the effectiveness of school improvement? And then how can ongoing evaluation and feedback mechanisms be integrated into our communication plan? So I am going to stop our recording.